Hey, we're live. Okay, it looks just like a window screen. Can you guys see this? How are you? Okay, so I would typically say give a round of applause to Elle-Máijá, Tailfeathers, and Kathleen Hepburn for this film, but we can't hear you. But I'm seeing so many compliments in the chat function, by the way, you guys. I'm looking. I don't know if you guys, Elle-Máijá, Kathleen, can you see the chat? Can you see the comments coming pouring in through the chats? Oh, okay. Well, we got absolutely beautiful. Wow, I am so sad. Thank you. Still so striking after third viewing. So lots of compliments pouring in. So that's what we that there's our applause there. So, I mean, I guess we'll start off. I feel like some audiences would, some of the viewers would already know this, but some may not. So let's go to the origin story. Like, this is something that actually happened to you with you, Elle-Máijá. So, yeah, do you want to just like start off and say like what talk about the inspiration for this film?
Sure. Yeah, so as you said, the film is inspired by an experience that I had in the same neighborhood where we shot the film. Kathleen and I both live in East Vancouver, and it's a really beautiful and complicated place. It's a place that's rapidly gentrifying. It's a place where there's been a predominantly working class demographic and artists as well, and now it's very rapidly gentrifying, and it's also the part of town that most of the, I would say, a large portion of Indigenous population lives. Um, an experience very similar to that Isla had, which is that I encountered a young Indigenous woman. She was 18, who had just fled her partner who had assaulted her, and she was standing barefoot in the rain. It was in February, I believe, so it was really cold. It was rush hour, and nobody was stopping for her. And so I ended up taking her home with me, thinking that I had the capacity to help her, and very quickly realized that I was so naive and I guess just inexperienced to that reality of fleeing domestic violence. Like, I come from privilege in the sense that I've never been in that situation before, and I benefit from light skin privilege. I'm middle class. I'm university educated, and my lived experience as an Indigenous woman is very different from that of someone like Rosie, who's visibly Indigenous, who's grown up in foster care, who doesn't have the financial means to escape this reality. So I learned so much from that young woman that day, and very much like in the film, I ended up taking her home back to the place where I found her, and I never saw her again. So the film was kind of an opportunity to honor that experience and honor her story, and I guess maybe communicate with her if if she's out there somewhere. I hope she's okay, and yeah, I hope she appreciates the film. It's of course fictionalized. Like, the Rosie character is completely fictional. We built something new with that character, but the experience is very similar to what happened in the film.
Well, I remember the first time I was watching the movie, and what really it really hit me in the gut when I realized, like, and when she's really fending for keeping her baby, right? And that's when I was like, oh, like that is the history that is informing this, right? Like, I mean, like that, and so, I mean, talk to me about, I mean, because we are, this film is like, it's a very, it shows us a very limited window in terms of experience. It's all of it takes place within, under the span of 2 hours, and yet it feels like it's carrying the weight of an entire history of all this trauma that's happened to her. Like, how did the two of you write that in? How do you develop a script like that to pack it in so densely in something that seems so kind of just natural?
Sure. Well, thank you for picking up on that. I mean, um, the film is a real time film, and it takes place over just less than 2 hours, and it was always our intention just to have it be this short encounter between two strangers, and everything that their collective histories bring to that experience. And so with Rosie, we wanted to speak to the issue of child removal and the foster care system in Canada. It's no secret that Indigenous youth are gravely overrepresented in the foster care system. In provinces like Manitoba, they make up like over 90% of youth in care. And there's been so many instances where youth have died while in care. I think there was just one case last week of I think an Innu teen who passed away in care. And we wanted to talk about the issue of what happens when youth age out of care. Um, and then obviously, you know, all Indigenous people have inherited this history of residential school and all of that sort of ugly colonial legacy that we've survived and continues to kind of live within us. And so with Rosie, we wanted to speak to this issue of Indigenous motherhood and Indigenous women's right to have children and to raise our children, because we've been stripped of that right for generations, and that consistent cycle of removal, which has been uh, premeditated and systemic on the part of the state, has had just, you know, irreparable damage in some cases. And so for Rosie, it's about that love that she has for this baby that's coming, and how that guides every decision that she makes, and how her goal is to raise that child and break that cycle of being removed and placed into care and being alienated from community and family and self and all of those things. And you know, when we talk about like teen pregnancy in film, it's often about like reproductive rights and in this instance, it's not so much about that. It's about the right to be a mother and the right to have a family and community and all of those things. With that being said, though, we wanted to talk about reproductive rights and class. And Kathleen had this beautiful idea of having the IUD scene with Elle-Máijá off the top, and that was an effort to talk about access to reproductive rights, especially when it comes to class and all of the privilege that informs access to reproductive rights. So yeah, it's a complicated conversation in that way.
Kathleen, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I would just say in terms of the writing, you know, unfortunately, it wasn't that hard to put all of this history into these characters because it exists, you know, and the Indigenous women's experience in this country holds all of this weight that's already there. So in terms of how we wrote it in, it's just like just by creating two women who are sort of confronted with their own privilege or lack of privilege in relation to one another. It was all already there, I guess, is what I'm saying. Like we didn't have to sort of put too much onto these characters.
You know, I'm actually remembering the first time I talked to you about this, and this is almost 2 years ago. I think. I mean, you remember it was you came to Toronto to audition for Night Raiders. Met the two of you, and I remember at that time you you were talking about how you were processing that experience into by making this film, right? Like it's part of like how you're processing with it. Well, I mean that conversation was almost 2 years ago. You wrapped this film more than 2 years ago. How has the way you experience this film or the way you look at this film evolved in the 2 years since, after you've seen this film come out into the world, after you've seen the way it's been received by people, after, you know, it's the film itself has been on this really long, huge journey? Has anything changed in the way you're seeing this story, this narrative, and the film itself?
I think for me, it's been the journey and the broad reach that this film has had has been pretty incredible. I didn't expect for a non-Indigenous audience to really gravitate to this film in the way that they have, and just discovering how universal the themes are in this film has been pretty overwhelming and heartbreaking in a lot of ways. It's like at screening, back when there were screenings in real life, someone would almost always reach out to us and say, you know, this is my experience. I've had a very similar experience to this. Thank you for putting it on screen. And so that aspect's has been really heavy and eye-opening, but also I guess grounding, in the sense that it feels like we did the right thing in telling this story. And yeah, I just, there's obviously so much more work to do on the part of providing services for women fleeing these sorts of situations. And yeah, I'm just rambling. Kathleen?
This is the curveball me and you talked about earlier, Kathleen.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, I didn't experience the original incident, so my processing was a little bit different. It was just sort of about learning and sort of experiencing these things through Maya's story and through Rosie's story and meeting Violet. And I think I do feel like I've grown a lot since making this film, just as a person, and I think I'm really grateful for that experience. But I couldn't wrap it up in a nice answer and say how. But I do think like it's just been a process of like sort of being opened up, I guess, to the world.
You mentioned Violet, so we might as well jump right in there. Like, okay, I mean, I know finding Violet, you know, finding the right actress, and then working with her to tell the story was a long process. So let's do it. Let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, do you want me to start, Maya? Sure. Yeah, so we found Violet. We'd seen her in a music video she did with a group called Untitled, who goes into different communities and makes videos with youth. So we'd seen her face there and heard her. She had a little rap sequence in it, which you should all check out. But we really saw her when we did our open casting call and sort of opened up to the broader community for just anyone to come in and audition. And she grew up in Surrey, and so we saw her self-tape from Surrey, and then we asked her to come in, and we just sort of fell in love with her very quickly. I think, you know, if you've seen the film, I think you can understand why. She's just like incredibly engaging and vulnerable and empathetic, and just she's got a beautiful smile, and she's just like, she just grabs you really, really quickly. But it was a long process, and we were a little uncertain because it was such a huge responsibility to take on for her. She was only 17 at the time and had never acted before. So we did go put her through a few hoops and made her do some acting workshops, which were pretty silly, I guess, from her perspective. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe Maya, do you want to talk about the rehearsal and all that?
Yeah, sure. So we were inspired by the process of theater in terms of the long rehearsal process, and then also that kind of informed our decision one of our decisions to do the single continuous take, because in theater there's like, you know, once you step on stage, that's it, and you have to go through the entire play beginning to end, and there's this like really incredible energy that builds, and there's also like, with the possibility of failure, it feels like every single decision is so much more intense. And so we decided to treat it like theater in that aspect. So we rehearsed with Violet for 4 weeks. We rented this old like fisherman's union space and rehearsed with Violet for 4 weeks. And then we rehearsed for 5 days with our full crew, because everything had to be perfectly choreographed in terms of all of the locations we moved to. I think we had 6 or 7 locations, getting in and out of the cars, going up and down stairs. And our brilliant DP normally developed something called real-time transitions. So we were able to shoot on 16 millimeter and built in all of these like camera transitions. So Violet's first time acting was like just this really wild experience, because normally when a feature film is shot, it's shot like completely out of chronological order. As an actor, you spend like 12 hours in a trailer waiting around for like your 1 or 2 hours actually on set. But for her, it was like she did the entire thing in one day, 5 times, with 4 weeks of rehearsal. So it was, yeah, a completely bizarre, out there process, and I'm so grateful we tried everything we did.
Sorry, I unmute myself. Sorry, there. You can hear me now, right? Yeah, okay. You mentioned so you're talking about the whole single take situation, right? And I just kind of want to jump in here with like, last year there was 2 movies that did like let's do it like we're doing it all in one take, right? It was 1917, which I actively disliked because that was someone just trying to show off what they could do. And then there was this, right? So like, I mean, you say was it just about the like? I mean, like this is obviously like I love this movie, and it felt like there was a real purpose in terms of keeping that intensity going, keeping that moment going. Is that it? Is that everything? Like having that, or was there more of a reason to do that? And if besides just the reasoning to it, you mentioned the stitch. Did you mention that it was also shot on 16 millimeter? And does that make it even? Sorry, that like is there more to that challenge as well?
Yes. Yeah, that made it additionally challenging. But to answer your first question, I think as Maya spoke about, the emotional journey for the actors was really, really important. And because we knew we had such a sort of limited toolbox in terms of creating drama and tension, just because the story really is just a conversation between 2 women, and it's a road movie in some ways, but it's like a very short trip and there's not a lot of action. So by keeping a continuous take, you sort of keep the audience in the moment with them, and you sort of you don't let them have that release. And I think that really pulls you in and makes you feel like you're on the journey with them, and you feel a little bit claustrophobic, but in a way that I think puts you into the emotional space of the characters. So that was one of the other key reasons why. And 16 millimeter, as Maya said, we had to have these transition points because if you shot on 16, you'll know that you only have 11 minutes of film in every mag. So we had to sort of pre-choreograph these moments where we could have these hidden cuts. So we ended up, shooting the film 5 times, and then sort of cutting between about 3 takes overall.
And then going back to Violet for a second, right? But like, I mean, not for a second, like, because there's more. I mean, there's a sense of like the authenticity of Violet in this character. I mean, I think Elle-Máijá, you mentioned before that you come from more of a privileged background when you were talking about Indigenous, people from an Indigenous background. But so like Violet, I think brought a certain authenticity given her background, but also she helped with the script, right? Like there was a workshopping process and stuff in terms of creating the story, no?
There was a workshopping process. Violet didn't help with the script, but she did come to the character with like lived experience that was very similar to Rosie's. And yeah, I didn't grow up with domestic violence. I didn't grow up in foster care. So in those ways, I think I'm very privileged as an Indigenous person to not have been touched by especially the foster care system. And I think like being connected to my community and culture and family, that's a form of privilege when it comes to being an Indigenous person. Privilege is very relative, but yeah, Kathleen and I wanted to ensure that we weren't just replicating extractive forms of filmmaking, wherein filmmakers tell stories from communities or experiences that they don't exactly sort of have the right to tell in a lot of ways. And so we wanted to ensure that we worked with Indigenous women or youth who'd been through foster care, and or who had experienced intimate partner violence or witnessed it, to make sure that we were telling the story in a way that wasn't just kind of, yeah, again, replicating these forms of extractive filmmaking and just taking from other people's lived experiences or other communities' lived experiences. And so we had a script workshopping process with 6 young Indigenous women who had all been through foster care, and yeah, it was a really great time, and they really kept us on our toes. And then we continued to work with some of them throughout the process as our through our Indigenous Youth Mentorship project that went alongside with this film. It was really important also that we weren't kind of like replicating these toxic forms of filmmaking that exist in terms of like hierarchy, and yeah, just treating cast and crew like, I don't know, objects that are they're simply just to serve the film. We wanted to build a sense of like community as we worked, so we had this really wonderful Indigenous youth mentorship project where we intended to help build capacity within the film industry, especially for Indigenous technicians within the key technical positions, because there's a ton of really talented writers and directors and producers, but not enough people working in like sound and wardrobe and camera, all of that. So we wanted to be a part of that, but it was also important for us to ensure that our non-Indigenous crew were starting from a place of like understanding and respect. And so we had like mandatory cultural competency and like Indigenous history training for our whole crew, to ensure, yeah, that we were working from a place of respect and like common understanding.
I didn't know that part about the cultural competency and training for the crew before that. That's because I mean it's interesting. I think Tracy Deer had to do a similar thing with the people that were on set for Beans, especially because Beans is telling the traumatic story of a child. She had to make sure that she wasn't passing on that trauma onto the child actors, and then so she really had to like work with the extras and the crews and make sure they like these white extras who are on one hand being like when they're performing they're like like being really monstrous, but then instead they had to turn that into cheers to cheer on the kids. So yeah, there's a lot of like just getting people like involved in the process of making sure we're protecting these youths and things like that. It's interesting also the building capacity. When you guys did this is the first time I ever heard of anyone doing something like that, and it's kind of caught on because I know like Trickster is doing the same thing. Like they're like if they can't fill the role. Trickster, by the way, if anyone's watching it, it's an incredible show on CBC right now, adapted from Eden Robinson's novels. I think last night was episode 3 maybe that came out, but so like whenever they couldn't find someone to fill a crew role, or like a technical role, they would then build in an paid internship for an Indigenous talent to do that. Have you seen that anywhere else before you did this?
I think it existed to a degree, but not in the way that it was kind of like across the bar, all departments had it. But yeah, it was a pretty wild experience, but really wonderful just to like have these youth on. And when we say youth, like some of them were up to the age of 30, and it's really cool to see so many of them like continue to work in the industry as like our sound guy, our camera guy, have both continued to work pretty regularly. A couple of them are in film school, finishing up film school. Yeah, it's really cool just to see their trajectory after the film.
Mm-hmm. By the way, so like I'm not getting a lot of questions from people. I'm getting lots of compliments. Like, so much, so compelling. It holds so beautifully. Both actors are incredible. I honor the hard work that went into the filmmaking. I'm just trying to pass some of these along. But one of the questions was about the music you chose to play. For one question was about specifically the music at the end credits. But why not also discuss the song that you chose to play to the baby with the headphones?
Do you want me to answer that, Kathleen? Okay. Um, so the song with the headphones is Joni Mitchell's Little Green, and Kathleen and I were at my place during the writing process, and I put on Joni Mitchell's Blue album just while we were talking, and that song came on, and I was like, Kathleen, did you know this is about uh, Joni Mitchell giving up her baby for adoption before she became like famous? And we just kind of were, you know, pulled towards that song, and then thought like, why don't we just try and license it and see. So we wrote a letter to Joni Mitchell, and yeah, I hope she read it, but yeah, it was licensed. It was the first time it had ever been used in a film, which was really, really cool. And Joni Mitchell was born in Fort Macleod, Alberta, which is in Blackfoot territory. It borders the nation that I'm from, and then she's also of Sami heritage, so yeah, we should just go for it. And then the second song is Fawn Wood's Mommy's Little Guy. And Fawn Wood is quite well known like in the Indigenous world in terms of the types of music that she makes, hand drum music mainly. And we used that song also during the rehearsal process as a way to like ground Violet in the work and connect her with I mean, she had a prosthetic belly, and so poor Violet had to like walk around with this really heavy uh, prosthetic belly, and so we had to during the rehearsal process try and like build that sense of like connecting to the body and life growing inside of her, and so that song was kind of a way that we would help her connect emotionally to that.
Someone also asked now about the taxi scene, the scene where specifically where Violet makes up the story about Rosie makes up the story of Isla being her sister, and I feel like there's some improv in there. No.
No improv, but I'm glad you felt like it was improv.
Okay, okay. But there was improv in other places, right? I'm getting all my information screwed up here. Okay, I am. Okay,
there were a couple tiny spots with improv, but that wasn't one of them.
Okay.
Especially just because the car scenes were like we had to stay on track for those because there were so many technical balls up in the air, you know, that were juggling. So script was something we had to stick to.
Yeah, but we did spend a lot of time workshopping that particular scene with Violet. It was one that she struggled with at first, but eventually we sort of rewrote it in a way that just felt more natural for her. But just on the improv note, I think she really wasn't comfortable with improv. I think there was, you know, a lot of pressure on her to remember everything and be in the right place at the right time at every moment. And it was just, she just felt more comfortable like knowing exactly where we wanted her to be and what to say, and not have to also think of, you know, something
Okay,
original.
I think. Sorry, were you finishing? So did I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
okay. So no, I think I hijacked the question with the improv comment though. So the question was though, like, so what was the thinking or the process? Like, why develop the scene that way? That dialogue.
Well, we wanted, there were so many things to consider with these two characters and the power balance between them, and we never wanted it to feel like a savior narrative. It was really important to always maintain that Rosie had agency and power in the situation. And in my real life experience, when I drove this young woman to the safe house, it was actually really fun. It was an opportunity for us to get to know each other, and as we were like trapped in terrible, I think it was like Friday rush hour traffic in the rain. And so it was an opportunity for us to get to know each other, but she was also just like really funny, despite everything that she was going through in that moment. Like she was still able to laugh and kind of like tease me. And so we wanted to show that sort of like irreverent moment. And so we did that in the taxi. Just had, it was also an opportunity to show like Violet's softer, funny side as well, because she's actually just like the sweetest funniest kid and was pulling practical jokes like constantly on the whole crew, like every day.
Yeah, so I want to actually like we could go back to like I want to go back to the journey of the film again, right? To that question because you premiered in Berlin, and Europeans aren't so cool about how receiving stories like this, and then you bring it to Toronto, you get this great reception. Then Ava DuVernay comes along and blasts it to the whole world. Is there anything to like any observations you can make about the way different parts of the world receive a story like this? And also, can you also add something like, well, what is it? What happens when you enter Ava DuVernay's air raid boot camp? Like, I mean, I'm sure people are wondering, like, what goes on over there?
Well, I should say the Germans actually were pretty receptive to the story. They didn't get the humor as much, but
The Germans notoriously love indigenous people, like in a really creepy way. No offense to Germans, but
yeah, they have a fetish. Well, sorry, what was
No, but yeah, compare the reaction and then just the blast off, like, you know, bring it to Tiff and then the blast off with the Ava, like, and seeing the different reactions across the world. Because I mean, I feel like anytime you end up on Netflix, Brazil shows a lot of passion.
Well, I guess we could talk about, I mean, the first time Ava called us was pretty amazing. I was on the Jersey Shore doing some research for another project in a cheesy hotel. But just to hear her voice, like we were speaking to Lane Jones, who runs she's sort of in charge of everything. She's the boss of how things run over there. And then Ava just sort of swept in for a few minutes on the call and just talked about, sort of nailed everything that the film was about and the way that we wanted it to live in the world, because until then we'd heard a lot of like, we really love the film, but we don't know how to sell it. But with Ava, it was like the exact opposite. She's like, I know exactly what to do with this film and this story. And she was so passionate about it. So that was really incredible. And then, I don't know, do you want to talk about the array experience, Maya?
it was pretty cool. Yeah, they have what's called campus, the array campus, and basically it's like a beautiful studio that is run by mostly Black women, which is like just so cool to see as an Indigenous woman working in this industry. Like we happened to be there on a day of like one of their staff meetings, and so we walked into this room of just like incredibly strong Black women all running this company, and it was just like, I don't know, it felt like I was in some sort of like dreamy alternate universe where it was like, wow, this is happening and this is possible. And space where they have writing rooms for the television projects. They have their own theater, the Amanda Theater, where they host screenings of some of their films, and they've done incredible work in terms of like building grassroots connections with communities. It's in what's known as like Filipino town in LA, and so they're building connections with the Filipino community there, and it's just been really, really wonderful to like be welcomed into Ava DuVernay's sphere, because she is like absolutely on fire, like all the time, 100% supporting marginalized voices, and people who haven't been offered space within the industry or opportunity within the industry. Like she's consistently building capacity and welcoming others into that space, and it's just like really, really incredible to have been welcomed into that sphere.
We'll also actually turn you guys into Academy Award voters, like, and they're gonna let me fill out their ballots. We have to wrap up, but there's one other question that I feel like this might help some of the audience members. Like they're Laura Borish is asking, why Berlin first?
Well, it's interesting because with festivals you have to you have to have like a festival strategy, and it's really important for films in terms of like the longevity of the film and distribution and where it travels for it to play at like at least one or two kind of like more prominent festivals, and Berlin is kind of one of the main or a really important international festival. And yeah, we were rejected by Sundance, and Berlin accepted us, and it was like a total honor to premiere in Berlin, and Berlin just happens to happen in February. And yeah, so TIFF was when we brought it back home to Canada.
Okay, well, thank you too so much. Oh, I should also say, like, I guess there's also the aspect of you could play here and then you could still play at TIFF, right? Because there's certain festivals, if you play there, TIFF won't take you. So you need to like strategize in that way, right?
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. Like some places will only take like world premiere, some will have to take like national premiere. It's just, yeah, it's really challenging and hard to navigate as a filmmaker. So
And well, thank you, Maya and Kathleen. I'll bring Charlie back to wrap this up. And thank you to everyone who's been asking the questions and hooting and hollering in the comments. Guys, I'm going to like screen cap that so I can send it to you, all the little compliments that are coming up here.
thank you.
So, first of all, let me thank our three guests. Rad, it's always a pleasure to have you here. You always make your guests in the moderation feel comfortable, and that was evident tonight. But I especially want to thank Kathleen and Maya for, first of all, that beautiful film. But also I have to say, as you know, someone who studies cinema, I don't think people realize the difficulty entailed in making a film in this way. You don't do, well, Brad was saying sometimes you do it just to show off, but you don't undertake a project and conceive of it in this way unless you have a true commitment to the material and presenting it in a way that just captures and sustains the intensity and the importance of the story that's unfolding before you. So I have to commend you again for that approach and for the result that you got from it. And I also have to say, Maya, the gravity of your performance in that film is really, you know, I have to give all due credit to Violet, but I think in a way you're the anchor of that film. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, working with Kathleen as a director and Violet was incredible. So yeah, thank you.
And again, the conversation we were saying, we have our own little side chat going on, the crew and and myself, and we were just saying how captivating the conversation was, and it just makes you appreciate the film all the more. So thanks again to the three of you, and I'm so glad we were finally able to bring this film to the Canadian Film Forum. And I'll just give a preview as we wrap up to two events that are coming soon. On November 9th, we have the Harold Innes Lecture, and our speaker this year will be Innes alum and Cinema Studies alum Jesse Wente. And I'm happy to say Jesse just emailed me today that the moderator will be Tanya Talaga. So that will be a great event, and tell all your friends. So that's November 9th. I think it will start at 7, but of course I don't have that information at my fingertips. So let's hope that it's somewhere in that vicinity. I'm being told what time it is. And this is sort of on the fly, obviously. 7 p.m. Yes, I was right. And then on November 22nd, we will have another Canadian Film Forum event, and we'll be showing The Grizzlies with Miranda Depensier. So that takes us to the end of this event. Thanks again to Rad and Kathleen and Maya for this wonderful film. And thanks everyone for coming. And we'll see you at our next event, I hope. Okay, good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.